I think I was live just a second ago. I'm not sure. This live streaming stuff still just mystifies me. Anyway, how are you all doing? Welcome to Pal to Tech Live. We have a great show for you today. Let me see what we are doing. Yep, we are live, so that is great. Okay. Got everything set here. Wonderful. Well, let me see. Hi, Shane. We got Richard. We got Thomas. All kinds of wonderful people joining us. And here's what we're going to do. We are talking about Fujifilm video exposure today. And this is live. Anything can happen, right? It's different than a normal video. I could be, I could forget to do any kind of teaching at all and just have, some cereal, right? And just have a bowl of cereal, which actually sounds good right now. So because it's live, we need to remember that, frankly, most of the people that are going to be watching this are going to be watching it later on, after the fact. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of break this into two parts. Part one, right now, I'm going to go over Fujifilm video exposure. This is aimed at beginners. If you're already experienced shooting in F-Log, this probably isn't the live stream for you. You're welcome to stay, but it is going to be mainly focused on beginners who want to take their Fujifilm camera out and start shooting, and some of the restrictions with exposure to doing that. The second part of this video is going to be a little Q&A and kind of talking to all of you. So we're going to do both, all right? So anyhow, let's get started here. The thing that is probably the most important thing for you to understand is that movie exposure is different than stills, okay? It's very different. Now, obviously, with shooting stills, you can use the exposure triangle. So you can set your ISO, you can set your shutter speed, you can set your aperture, and adjusting those will adjust your exposure for shooting stills. Now, video has all of that same type of way of adjusting the exposure built right into it. But there's a pretty big difference, okay? And you certainly could set all of your settings on A for everything. So you set it all to A, and then the camera takes control of the exposure while you're shooting video, and it will adjust all of the settings to make sure that you have proper exposure. But I recommend not doing that, okay? And the reason why is that you have, for example, when you're shooting stills, if you have the camera locked down on a tripod and your subject is completely frozen, not in motion at all, so you have a static subject, you have your camera locked down on a tripod, and you have full control over your lighting. If you have all of those three conditions, then it doesn't really matter if your camera is shooting at 1/30th of a second or say 1/4000th of a second. Does that make sense? Okay, think about that for a minute. When you're shooting stills, if you can control all the other aspects, then your shutter speed is not that important. But with video, it is a whole other ballgame. It's very different. And with video, you must follow what is called the 180-degree shutter rule. For those of you that don't know what that is, all right, it's very simple. What that means is that you always want to set your shutter speed, okay, to be exactly double your frame rate. Double your frame rate. And so, for example, if you're shooting at 30 frames a second, your shutter speed should always be set to 1/60th of a second. This is really important. There's a lot of videos on the topic, but it has to do with perceived motion in your video, right? So if you're shooting somebody running down the street and you're not following this rule, and say you have your shutter speed to, 1/1000th of a second, it's going to be very jerky. The motion is not going to look good. It's not going to look cinematic, right? So always, always, always want to follow this rule. Yes, there are exceptions if you're going for a certain look, but if you're just out shooting with your camera, getting general stuff, and you're unsure, if you double your frame rate, if you set your shutter speed to double your frame rate, that is going to be what you want to do. And it's very, very easy to do. For example, if you're in your camera, okay, in movie mode, if you look right here, this is your frame rate. So right here, I'm at 2997. I'm at 60 frames per second. Boom. Okay. Now, what I want to do is I want to set my shutter speed to be 1/60th of a second. There it is. See that right there? Just like that, okay? That's how you have to do it. And there's a special feature on Fujifilm cameras that allows you to get an exact doubling of the amount. Let me show you what I mean by that. So for example, if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, okay, 24 frames a second, what would your shutter speed ideally need to be? 1/48th of a second. That's double 24, okay? So if you're here, right, you set it to 24, if you go back here, it's at 60th of a second. If I go to rotate the shutter speed dial, look at how in the camera it jumps from 60 to 30, 60 to 30. It doesn't allow me to get between them. Well, you actually can do that. And what you need to do, all right, is you need to rotate the command dial just like this. Can you see that right there, the command dial? So if you rotate the command dial, it goes between those values and it goes right to 1/48th of a second, just like that, okay? And that will give you exactly your double your frame rate, okay? So that's very important. Never forget that rule. Now, Fujifilm has restrictions on the shutter speed that you can use when you're out shooting movies. And in fact, it's so important to Fujifilm that they actually tell you in the menu, okay? Let me show you what I mean. So for example, in the menu, if you go into your movie mode, look at right here. You see this area down toward the bottom. It says, cannot use shutter speed lower than frame rate. You see that? It's right at the bottom, okay? Let me see if I can point it out here. It's right there, okay? It's whoops, come on, focus. It's right there. It's that sentence right there, okay? So, cannot use shutter speed lower than frame rate. So for example, if my frame rate is at 60 frames per second, okay? 60 frames per second. Now, when I'm in the camera, my shutter speed is 1/60th. If I try to rotate the command dial to go lower than 1/60, the camera will not allow it, right? Watch this. I'm turning it, and nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. I'm turning this dial and nothing's happening. So in this case, if I turn it the other way, I can go up. Look at that. I can go way up here, but I cannot go below. So that's another rule to keep in mind. That's a restriction on these cameras. Okay. Okay, so now we know that unlike shooting stills, when you're shooting movies, shutter speed is really important and you want to set a fixed value, which is double your frame rate. So I'm out now and I'm about to start shooting, and I am now going to begin setting my camera for the proper exposure. The first thing I do is set my shutter speed. In this case, we are going to, for our demo and our example, we are going to be at 24 frames per second, which means I want a shutter speed of 1/48th of a second, just like that, okay? Okay, so now the next thing you want to set is your ISO, right? And there are 3 situations to kind of deal with ISO. The first is if you have full control over your lighting, all right? Suppose you're shooting an interview indoors and you have complete control over the lighting. You're not moving from room to room. Everything's fairly the same and you can control everything. If that's the case, what I would always recommend is you set your ISO to the lowest base ISO on the camera. And on the Fujifilm X-T3 and X-T4, that would be 160 ISO right here, just like this, if you can see it, 160 ISO. You see that right there? Set it to that, to 160. If you have an X-T2, I believe if you have an X-T2, it's 200 ISO. So you need to check whatever camera model you have. But whatever camera model you have, set it to the lowest base ISO, okay? So that's the first thing. Now, if you have partial control over your lighting, let's say you're outside and it's sunny outside. However, maybe clouds could go overhead, right? Maybe clouds could go overhead, or you don't, or let's say you're shooting indoors, a theater or a concert, and the lighting changes a little bit, but is kind of more or less the same. In those cases, you'll want to still set your ISO as low as possible, but you need to factor in, obviously, your exposure and how good it appears and looks in the viewfinder. So in this case, you still want to go as low as possible, but don't be afraid to go up in ISO. Fujifilm cameras can handle that. I have no problem shooting movies at 800 ISO at all. And I would rather shoot a movie at 800 ISO and have full control over my aperture than to be worried about that, okay? And I actually I'm gonna get into aperture in just a minute. So the next thing though, is if you're shooting in mixed conditions. In those cases, like, you know, you're following a subject indoors and then they're going outside, or you're shooting children, right? They're running all over the place. I mean, for those kinds of situations where you want a minimum amount of fuss, you know, the easiest thing possible, just put the ISO dial in A for automatic, right? Just drop it right into A for automatic, and then the camera will basically choose the correct ISO as you're shooting, and it will constantly be changing. Let me show you something, okay? So for example, I'm gonna go ahead, I've got my ISO in A, I've got my shutter speed at 1/48th of a second, okay? And I'm gonna go ahead and start shooting. Here we go, boom, I'm shooting video now. Look at my ISO. Right now, it's at 800, okay? It's at 800. Let me aim it at a light. Ooh, look at that. It dropped all the way to 160 because it did not need, right? It didn't need to go higher than that. If I cover the lens, look at that. It goes to 12,800, okay? So that changes based on the conditions of the scene if you put your ISO in A for automatic mode. Now, very important, the ISO range when you are shooting movies on your Fujifilm camera is 160 to 12,800 on the X-T3 and the X-T4, and on other cameras like the X-T2, it would be 200 to 12,800. It's basically the base ISO, but it doesn't go any higher than 12,800. And you wouldn't want it to, because it would bring a lot of noise into your footage, okay? Remember that shooting video, it's not like you can take it into Lightroom and, you know, tweak a raw file. You can, and that has to do with F-Log. We are not covering F-Log in this video. I have a whole video on F-Log. If you want to know about F-Log, go check out my video, but F-Log is an option if you want to be able to have more control later on in post-production. But what I'm talking about today with exposure and getting these settings are for those people that don't want to deal with F-Log. They want to have the film simulations. They just want to get out and shoot. And so for the minimal amount of hassle, just set it to automatic ISO and you should be good there, okay? Let me make sure we are still watching. We got people from Russia, okay? Thomas says, what about ISO 80? You cannot use that ISO value in movies. That will not work. The lowest ISO you can use on the camera is the base ISO, the native ISO, which on the X-T4 is 160. You can't go down to 80, unfortunately, when shooting movies, okay? I'm gonna get to all your questions at the end of this, but that's a very good one. Good job. All right, so the next thing is, if you are shooting F-Log, for those of you that shoot F-Log or want to shoot F-Log, okay, if you're in your camera settings and you go into your video settings and you change your F-Log output to F-Log, just like that, now have a look at this, okay? If I try and change my ISO, let's say I want to set my ISO to 400, okay? I'm setting my ISO to 400, okay? Look at the camera. Look at that. 640. Do you see that right there? And the reason for that is if you are shooting in F-Log, the lowest ISO you're allowed to set is 640. And by that same logic, all right, by that same logic, then what that means is if you're shooting movies with your X-T3 and you're shooting in F-Log, then the lowest, the range, the entire range you get is 640 to 12,800, but it will not go below 640, okay? Okay, I think we got some coverage on this. We're good here. We got people joining us. Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Okay, so we've adjusted our ISO. We've adjusted our shutter speed, okay? We are all set to now have a bowl of cereal. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, no. What do we have left? Aperture. We got to set our aperture, all right? So I always adjust my aperture last. And the reason I do that is I want to have complete control over kind of the cinematic quality of what the footage is going to have, right? So for example, anytime you're adjusting aperture with these movies, you're either adjusting the aperture for an exposure reason or for a background isolation reason, okay? Let me show you what I mean. Let me flip over to the camera and let's do this. I am going to put what I'm going to do is I'm going to put just for now, I'm going to put my ISO dial in A for automatic. So I got it ISO and automatic. I have a fixed shutter speed of 1/48 of a second. You see that right there? Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just adjust my aperture ring to let more light in or to reduce light, to open it up or to close it down. Watch what happens to my footage when I do that. Okay. So here we go. We're right here. And I am at f2 right now. Look at the background at f2. I'm shooting video. Here we go. I am now going to rotate the aperture ring. Rotating it, rotating it, rotating it, rotating it. Look at that. I'm at f5.6. I'm at f8. I'm at f11. I'm at f16. You can start to see the background there. And frankly, when you can see all that background and behind your subject, it doesn't look as cinematic. Okay, so back to this. I don't want that. I want to drop down my aperture to, f2.8. There we go. And so look at how everything is changing. Look at how the camera is adjusting the ISO as I'm turning the aperture ring. So again, the order in which I do it, and there's no rule for this. I mean, you do it however you want. But the order in which I always do it is I set my firm shutter speed to make sure that I'm adhering to the 180-degree rule and that I am double my frame rate, okay? Once I set that, I then decide on the lighting conditions and will set my ISO, usually to the lowest value, right? And finally, I will adjust my aperture so that I can decide how much of my image, of my video, should be in focus or not. That's generally kind of the way I do it. And if you've never really gotten into video with Fuji before, I recommend giving that a try and seeing how that works for you, okay? All right, so let's go to what happens, okay? This is kind of a trick question, but it's an important one. What do you do if you are in a really bright condition, okay? It's bright as heck outside. You have your ISO at the lowest possible value it can go. So I'm going to put my ISO in 160, okay? Now, remember that rule, your shutter speed must be double your frame rate. So my shutter speed right now, let me go and my shutter speed is 1/48. You see that right there? Okay. And I am going to take the camera out of f-log so that we're not restricted with that 640 ISO. Okay, so here we go. We are at 1/48 of a second shutter speed, 24 frames per second shooting, okay? And my desire is to have my subject isolated from the background. So what am I gonna do? I am gonna open up the lens as wide as I can get it, right? To have that narrow depth of field. So I'm gonna turn the aperture ring all the way over to f2. All right, that's as wide open as this particular lens can get, right? So now if I aim it at the subject, if you look at the exposure here, look at the meter on the left-hand side of the screen. That exposure looks pretty good. At ISO 160, at 1/48 of a second, with this f-stop, damn, that looks really good. That looks really awesome, okay? But what do you do if you walk outside and you still want those same settings? Or if the lights get really bright, right? Let me show you. Let me demo this, okay? Let's get a light in here. We need some light. Let there be light. All right, we got some light. Okay. Now, it suddenly got really bright in here. Yeah, right. It got really bright. So, watch this. I'm going to go back to the camera's view. Look at this. I'm turning my aperture ring all the way down to f16. And even at f16, look at the histogram, okay? But watch what happens as I turn it up. Wait a second, I want that nice background, but it's screwed up. What do I do? What does one do in a case like this? Well, what one does, this is really bright. Okay, right, I can't. Okay, there we go. All right, what do you do in a case like that, okay? You need one of these ND filters, okay? It's basically sunglasses for your camera lens. That's all they are. Now, there are two types of ND filters. The first is fixed. A fixed ND filter is a set value. It never changes, all right? So let's have a look at this filter right here. Here's an example of one. This is a fixed filter, and it screws on the lens. They come in different sizes. And this is a 6-stop filter. So it will reduce the light going into the camera by 6 stops if you screw this thing onto the lens that it's made for, okay? That's what that's for. And if you do that, watch. Let me put the light back on. Light back on. Okay, and let's do this. All right, here we are. I am now putting it over the lens. Look at that. You see that? Even then, I probably need an 8-stop filter, but that's better. And that way, you can be outside, or you can be in really bright light and still have your lens wide open and still adhere to the the 180-degree rule with your shutter speed, okay? So that's why you have these ND filters. And the other type of ND filter is a variable ND filter. And honestly, between the two, if you're just starting out, I recommend getting the variable one instead of the fixed, because a lot of times when you're out running, gunning, you're shooting different lighting conditions, it is so nice to be able to adjust the strength of the filter on the fly. Take a look at this here. Okay, I'm going to try and see if I can do it here. Look at this. Can you see? Oh yeah, look at that. Look through the filter. You see that? Look at that. You see that? How cool is that? Okay, how cool is that? Okay, I will have a link to some ND filters. When this video is done, by the way, it's going to be played back and published. I will have some links to some ND filters that I recommend that you get if you've never gotten one before. All right, keep in mind that the cheaper you get with ND filters, this can sometimes add color cast to your footage. And it can be corrected in post-production, but you want to get it as correct in camera as possible. So an ND filter is one of those things that if you are going to be shooting video a lot, is a must-have. It's not like having, a pretty little yellow button. It's, nice to have. This is an absolute drop-dead necessity to have if you're shooting video footage in brighter lighting conditions, because you want to be able to adjust that aperture to fit the vision of what you're trying to shoot and blur that background. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's that. All right, we got that covered. Okay, so getting good exposure, I don't have enough time to get into getting good exposure. And frankly, that's something that nobody is going to be able to really teach you. Getting good exposure, the best way that you can get good exposure is to take your camera, go outside, put it in video mode and start shooting. Look at your footage, see what you did wrong, then do it again. Then do it again. Repeat that about, 1,000 times, and you will get excellent exposure, trust me. In the meantime, though, getting good exposure, there are 3 main tools in the camera that can help, with that, all right? The first tool is the histogram. I just made a video on the histogram. I do not want to talk about the histogram again, except to say, I love the histogram, but I will say that the histogram is in video mode. You see it moving and changing. You see that right there in the lower right corner of the screen, okay? So use your histogram. I always use the histogram when shooting stills. I use it some of the time with video, but there are other tools I'm about to tell you that I use more for video. Okay, so the next one is the RGB histogram. I did a video on the RGB histogram. You got to go check that one out too. And the RGB histogram is like, it's kind of like the regular histogram, but on steroids, you know. The RGB histogram kind of looks like this. So it gives you the red, green, and blue color channels with the luminosity histogram all at once. All right, so that is handy as well. Although I am finding more and more, I don't use that a whole lot for video. The one that I use a lot for video to help me get good exposure, and I wish Fujifilm would have this for stills, is zebras. Zebras are awesome, okay? Zebras are awesome. Let me show you where they are. You go into your camera settings, into the little camera icon area. You look for something that says zebra setting. You see that right there? Go ahead, and you could choose either left or right. It makes absolutely no difference. So you just pick one of them. And if you notice, there's a zebra level indicator. If it's at 100%, okay, that means that you will see zebras appear in your footage if you are blowing highlights. If you are at 100% pure white, no image data, do not pass go, do not collect $200. Go watch my histogram video, okay? That's what 100% is. However, if you drop it down, say to 80, okay, then you will start to see, you'll start to see the zebras appear when you're at 80%, right? And so forth. So there's lots of different opinions on where to set your zebra, and I can't give you a hard and fast rule for this. Generally, they say when you're shooting people, you could put it anywhere between 60 and 80 to make sure you're getting the right skin exposure, okay? But, you know, you've got to experiment. I mean, you have to play around with it. Believe it or not, most of the time I leave mine at 100. And it also will depend if you're shooting in F-Log or not. All right, keep that in mind. If you're already experienced shooting in F-Log, you know all this already. But for those of you just starting out, I would say set it to 100, maybe to 90. Set it to 90, okay? Set it to, so right here, maybe right to about there. Try that. You know, that kind of gives you a little bit of a buffer to be on the safe side. And let me show you what it looks like. All right, so here in this case, look at this. Already, these areas right here are at 90% of the exposure, right? They're not blown out. But if I go back to my zebra level and I set it to 100, okay, now if I'm shooting video, there are areas that are going to be completely blown out. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You're in charge of your own scene. You may want to have areas blown out because you're trying to get something in your scene that you won't be able to see it unless you blow out certain areas. Let me show you, see if I can show you an example of that. So so here, I want everybody to see, I'm gonna go down to F16, I'm gonna go to automatic ISO so we can see this. Okay, so in this case, I want everybody to be able to see these cereal boxes. Okay, I want everybody to be able to see them. I'm just turning up this a little bit. All right, so in this case, right here, if I use these settings, look in the lower right. Do you see the zebras there in the lower right? Okay, I am blowing that highlight out completely. It's gone, but I can see the cereal boxes in the background. But if I change this and get rid of, if I get rid of these things, look at that. If I drop it down, now I can't see the background. So something to remember about zebras, it's so important to remember that they are not there. You know what? Listen to me. Zebras, histograms, RGB histogram, all of this stuff, all of it. It is not there to tell you if your photo is right or wrong, or if it's a good or bad shot, or if you've made a mistake or not. It's not there for that. They're just tools. They're just there to say, okay, photographer, if you shoot it this way, these are the areas of your image that are going to be blown out. That's all it does. And if you're okay with that, because you're the artist, you're the one that needs to decide that. If you're okay with that, then great. They're just tools. So don't be, chained to your zebras. Use them as a tool, and you'll find that they will help you immensely. Are they as good as zebras that are implemented on cinema cameras? No, they're not, okay? But for what's packed into an X-T4, it's pretty good they have them. Now, I have to just say this. Fujifilm, could you please, pretty please, with 10 spoons of sugar on top, could you make zebras available for still shooting? I would love that. I would love that in a firmware update. I would shout it from the mountaintops. I think it would be great because I find the zebras very handy. Okay? All right, so we are now done with we're done with this thing, the slides, right? And how was this format? Could you even see it? It was very difficult to get this monitor in place because if I rotate it just slightly, I got the light bouncing off of it, right? So I had to have it just in the right spot, So anyway, I hope it was helpful. I've got to get to my comments, all right? Let me just get, you know what? This is really bothering me to have this here, so I'm just going to move this thing off. And I just put it on I have real high-tech equipment here at Pal Tech. This is a step ladder, okay? So, yeah, I just used a step ladder. That's all. Okay. That's it. That's all I used. But now I can kind of see. Let's get the better lighting in here. Boom. All right. How are you all doing? How are you all doing? Who's here today? But by the way, if you're watching this played back later on and you don't see the chat comments, I'm sorry. I have no control over that. That's YouTube. I set them to display. YouTube may have screwed it up. If you see the chat comments, these were people that attended live, all right? And I know you're not watching this live right now, so I've already covered the topic at hand. And for those people who attended live, I'm now going to talk to them, okay, before I go. So you've been warned. All right. Where do we go? Hello, 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 hello. We have a Mr. Nobody. Perfect name for you, pal. We got Tomnik, Luke B. from Germany, Richard the Architect. That's cool. You got your name right, the Architect. I want to be like Pal Tech, the YouTuber. David is here. We've got Peter. Okay, so we got all these awesome people. Aranga, Anthony, Salah. I'm going to go back and read through all these. There's so many comments. So somebody's still, Richard is still fighting COVID-19, but doing well. Best of luck to you, sir. You'll get better soon. I hope you feel better soon. That is no fun at all. That is no fun at all. We got somebody here, Will from Perth, Australia. I love Perth. Love Perth. I went to Aunt Maud's. I stayed at a place called Aunt Maud's in Perth. You probably know what it is. Alex, good evening. Hector from Mexico. Awesome. Cincinnati. Mark from Cincinnati. Very cool. So does anybody have any questions about exposure in video that I can help answer, or any advice that you want to throw out here in the comments? Because remember that what you put in these comments are going to be seen by thousands of people. So if there's a tip that works for you, by just typing a couple of sentences, you're helping thousands of people. No kidding. So it's great. I'm just kind of the driver here. This is your car. I'm just driving it. You can do these things however you want to do it. So we got a lot of people asking, Fuji, we got a lot of people asking for zebras for stills. Hello from Romania, Copenhagen, in India. Awesome, awesome. So couple of things here I'll talk about real quick. I did get I think it's on the, the lens is on, it's on this camera right here, but I got my Fujifilm 16 to 55 millimeter lens back. Believe it or not, I still don't know what's wrong with it. So I am in the process of trying to find that out from Fuji. They did repair it. They did send it back to me. And from what I understand, it was a part that needed to be replaced. and it was about, I think it was $269 or $68. I'd have to look at the receipt, but it was under $300 for whatever was wrong with it. I have the lens now. I'm shooting on it as we speak, so I can't hold it up, but that I got it back, luckily. So do I shoot? Okay, so Peter asks, do I shoot with GFX systems? I would love to. At present, no, I don't shoot with GFX systems. When I tested the GFX 100, that was and is still the greatest camera I've ever used. And I think where Fuji is going with the GFX system is absolutely the right path to take. And I want so badly to test out the GFX 100S. I think that that is really the next logical step up from APS-C. If you're using APS-C in Fujifilm and you want to get serious and you need that extra, sensor size and what those cameras can provide, then I don't see the point in jumping to full frame. I would just go to the GFX system. But you need to know why you're doing it. I mean, don't just, it's a lot of money, and there are some drawbacks to using GFX. Autofocus is not as fast, for one. So it's a tool like anything else. If you have a Ferrari versus, a big pickup truck, Ferrari's going to blow it away every time. But you know what? If I have to haul a bunch of bricks down to somewhere, I'll take the pickup truck. It just depends on what you need it for. So no, I don't. What do I expect from the X-T5? Let's talk the X-T5. I love that question from Urin. Okay, so the X-T5. I do think Fuji needs to release an X-T5. And for an X-T5, I would love a few things. I know that a lot of people want the flip screen to go back to what the flip screen was with the X-T3. And I mean, I love that flip screen on the X-T3. I use it a lot. But I got to tell you, I use this type of flip around so much. What I would love is if Fuji could cook up something where it does both. It kind of flips out like that. And if you need it to, you can flip it all the way up. I would like that so that it gives you the best of both worlds. That would be a feature I would like to see in the X-T5. I would also like to see, for example, obviously IBIS to continue in the X-T5. I'm sure they would carry that over. As far as battery life, I'm happy with the battery life on the X-T4. I mean, I love that. I'd like to see more video features. In terms of low light performance, that can always be improved for sure. Ergonomics, the ergonomics is okay. The way my hands are, I've never loved the ergonomics of holding it this way, but you can get an accessory for that. So that's not kind of a big deal. I would love to have a built-in ND filter on the Fujifilm X-T5. That would be awesome. So that with a setting change in your menu, you can have an ND filter effect if you're out and you forgot an ND filter. I can't tell you how many times I forget to bring this, and I would love to have a way to be able to flip a switch on here and get an ND filter. That would be on my wish list for sure for that. And what do you guys think? What would be your wish list? Because I guarantee you Fuji is watching this video. So put down your wish list. Dual ISO, yes. Better bit rate for slow-mo. Yeah, definitely better bit rate for slow-mo. That's not a deal breaker for me. I mean, I shoot slow-mo, but it's not, the 60 frames per second for me. Again, everybody has their own use for it, but that's not high up on my list, but sure, I would welcome it. It would be awesome. Better bit rate for that. Now the big deal would be, do they do an XH2 with 8K, or do they port 8K over into an X-T5? What would you prefer? I would prefer, I don't know. I would prefer an awesome X-T5 that could have everything. Because if it just came to an XH2, I love the dial here where I can flip from still to movie. And I think a lot of photographers are getting more and more into video. I think that that's just a place of no return. Not everybody's doing it, but more and more are dabbling into video. And so the more video features can be brought into the XT system, I think the better. I think 8K is beyond overkill for just about anybody. The only reason I would use 8K, right, would be for shots like this where I would shoot it in the studio at 8K. And then you ever watch my videos and like I'm da 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 da, and then I cut in like this, and then I cut back like this. Whoops, I hit the wrong button. And then I cut in, and then I cut back, and then I cut in, right? Well, to be able to cut in like that, if you're shooting at 8K, when you cut in, the footage will look beautiful in 4K. You're not enlarging it. It just looks beautiful. So for that reason, I would love 8K. Okay. What else do we have? 240 frames per second on X-T4. Loss in quality is quite, yeah. Oh, okay. Yes. Sala. Yes. I don't like dongles. I hate dongles. I don't want to use them. And I want the microphone jack. What is it, the thing he said? Yeah, the mic jack. So, no, not the mic jack, the headphone jack. I want the headphone jack back on the camera. Definitely want the headphone jack back on the camera. If they take the mic jack away, that's the end of Fuji for me. No, they got to have the mic jack. But for headphone jack, to have that on here, I would love it. And I don't care what side they put it on. You know, maybe they could stick it right here, but I definitely would love that. They need to keep dual card slots for sure for the X-T5. Absolutely. I can't tell you how many times that has saved my butt, having both the extra space and also the redundancy. So that is another one. I have not seen the Fuji prime lenses for video yet, so I can't comment on that. I am starting to get into renting lenses. In fact, I have a lens around here. I'm not even going to spoil the surprise. I rented a lens. I'm in the middle of shooting, and you are going to see a new lens review from me very soon. So yes, I will rent those lenses and tell you what I think. I don't know. Honestly, right now, I have not used them at all. Florian, how you doing? Got one of our Gear Iguana members on here. Thank you so much for your support. I love that. It's awesome. Thank you. It helps so much. Prefer 4K 120 instead of 8K and 422 10-bit inside. Yeah, that is a good point for sure. I'll tell you something. I'll make a deal with Fuji. They can wait on an X-T5 for another 6 months. All right, I'm happy with the X-T4. Wait on an X-T5 for another 6 months and get the best group of people you can, Fuji. Get your top engineers, go to Silicon Valley, and grab a couple of the best app programmers on the planet. Bring them to Japan, put them up somewhere, right? Pay them, and let's get that app redesigned. I don't want a version 2. I don't want a version 3. I want the entire app scrapped and a brand new app put in place that can really work well. That's my personal wish list, because I am always resorting to either updating the firmware with the SD card, or I have the JJC thing with a remote release. I never use the app for that. The app just for me, and I've heard other people that love the app and think the app works great. I just can't make it work for me. I don't know. Maybe I'm too old. So fix the app. That's actually more important to me. Okay, so what else do we have? Flip screen. We've got lots of great suggestions. Yes, obviously more accurate face eye auto detect. I went on a shoot last weekend and I wasn't thrilled with the face eye auto detect. I was in low light. It wasn't great. I'm going to go out on another shoot this weekend and I'm going to test it again. But and it's with that lens that, yeah, I can't talk about right now. So I will, but I want to test it again. I want to run it through, because sometimes when you're testing things, there could be other reasons. So yeah, better low light face eye auto detect. And let's have animal and bird face eye auto detect. That would be awesome too. I'd love that. So, okay. Let's see here. Hello from Norway. Hello. Okay, so I covered the lens, I covered the exposure stuff. If you have any video ideas of topics, let me know, please. You'd be surprised at how hard it is to run this channel. It may look easy, but the hardest part about running a channel like this instead of a vlog, it would be so much easier if I did a vlog, right? Because then all I have to do, right, is just turn the camera this way, you know, hi guys, that's all I got to do. But with a channel like this, the hardest part is you have an audience of kindergartners versus all the way through graduate school level of skill and knowledge, right? And I'm not knocking the kindergartners. What I mean is people brand new to photography. There are people that watch this channel that have never really picked up a camera before. And then I have photographers who watch this channel that are out shooting, you know, fashion on the streets in Paris. So the hardest part about running this channel is how do you not lose or confuse or go too fast for the beginners, but not bore the hell out of the advanced users. That's always difficult to do. And so, you know, that's the hardest part of running the channel. So reason I said all that, if you have any suggestions for video ideas, let me know, because it's not that I'm tapped out of ideas. I got lots of ideas, but they would mean more to me coming from you, for sure. Okay. All right. Let's see. Will I be comparing the Fuji Tamron with the Tamron? I'm waiting on Tamron. Tamron, you're watching this. Reach out to me. Last I heard, you're waiting, okay? But you got my email, so shoot me a message, Tamron. Okay. All right. Okay. How do I deal with overheating of the X-T4 for video? This is one of the last few questions I'll answer today. How do I deal with overheating on the camera? Overheating used to be a huge problem, and in some cases it still can be. The number one way to avoid overheating, if you have a choice in the matter, is to not shoot 4K at 60 frames a second. Okay? Shoot 4K at 24 frames a second. Shoot 4K at 30 frames a second. That is one way to really avoid the overheating. If you have no choice but to shoot 4K at 60 frames per second, then, you know, you could make your studio colder. That's one way of doing it, right? Another way, if you go into the camera, there is a setting in the menu under, I think it's in here under power management. Look at this, auto power off temperature. If you have this choice right here, set it to high, okay? Set it to high, all right? And that will then tell the camera, you can get a little hotter before you shut yourself off. Okay, so that's another way that you could deal with it. At that point, with, you know, overheating, I guess Fuji, in some ways, they're right in that if you're shooting 60 frames a second 4K, you're most likely not going to be shooting a sit-down talking head interview for an hour at 4K 60 frames per second. For something like that, you're going to shoot it at 24 frames per second or 30. So I understand where they kind of cut the corner on that one, but, you know, I don't think I ever shoot 4K longer than, you know, maybe 7 or 8, 10 minutes tops at 60 frames per second. So again, something to just think about. Other than that, I don't have any other answers to keep the camera, you know, some people even recommend putting ice packs here. I mean, you'll hear all kinds of things, but you know, if you just have to get the footage shot and you're not so big on your frame rate, then drop it down to 30 and you should be fine. Okay, so someone asks, Studio LD asks, do you know if we can clean the Fuji X-T4 sensor vertically with a 24 millimeter swab? That's a really good question. And I don't think you can. Hold on, you know what? I don't have the swabs right here. You have my email. It's on the YouTube site. Shoot me an email with that question and I will go look at the swabs that I use and I can get back to you and tell you, but I don't want to leave where I'm at right now and look for them, but I'm not sure the answer to that, but just write to me and I'll tell you what it is. Okay, so see, here we go. I got my first, someone says, Naomi says, I recently got my first ever camera, a Fujifilm, the X200. Oh, and you want to say thank you. I thought you had a question. Thank you. I know, I really appreciate that. I was like thinking, and how do you set the... No, thank you so much. That's awesome. That means a lot to me. Thank you. Okay. Night shooting techniques. Great suggestion for a video. Shooting at night. I'm also going to do one on shooting kids. Best practices shooting kids. Definitely have some things to say on that. Okay. and I got a couple of fun videos coming up, but I don't want to tell you what they are because, as I've said before, when you talk about video that you're doing, you talk about any project that you're doing, people in the comments will go, oh, that's great. And then for me, that's like a dopamine of, yay, they like it. And then I'm less motivated to finish it. So I'm not going to say what I'm working on really, but just know I do have some fun videos coming up. I'm kind of wanting to get back, and I was telling my Patreon members that this morning. You know, we have the Patreon account, so I share all my crazy thoughts with them. And I was telling them this morning that, you know, I want this channel to get back a little bit to the type of video that I made yesterday. You know, the histogram. If you look at that histogram video, that is kind of where I like to have the channel. I don't like 30-second tutorial videos. They're too short for me to teach in. And I don't like serious videos all the time. I want to kind of keep it light and fun. And that histogram video for me was kind of a balance where there were some intermediate to advanced topics mentioned, but it was for beginners, and it kind of moved along, had fun with it, did a spot for anchor on there. You know, it was good. So that's the kind of stuff I want to do more of in the future, which is what I used to do when I started the channel. Yeah. Okay. So, wow, you guys are just so many questions here. I love it. Well, first of all, for those of you that have just gotten your new cameras that I see here, I wish I could be you. I wish I could pick up a Fujifilm camera for the very first time and do it all over again. I would love that. But since I can't, I have to live vicariously through you. So please share your experience with me in the comments, right? Email me. I would love to hear it. Send me a link to your portfolio. Follow me on Instagram. I am at Pal2Tech on Instagram, so I can see what you're doing and what you're up to with your camera journey. I would love that. Okay. All right. I do have to get going here. Let me just see if there's any other quick questions I can answer. Shooting landscapes. Good. Thank you, Luke. Appreciate it, pal. Let's see here. The X150 to 60. We got all this stuff. All right. Okay. So, I think we covered the basics of exposure. And if you missed the beginning of this video, or if you're just watching this now, I did a live stream. The first half of the first 30 minutes of this video is all about exposure in shooting video. And I hope it was helpful to you. I feel like I got a little bit of a rough start today, and I actually had to stop the stream and restart it, but I think it ended up great. So in the meantime, thank you so much for being here. And I've got another video coming out on Friday, so I can't wait to show that to you. Everyone, see here, update on your... David, I gave it an update already on that, but I'll say it again real quick because I know a lot of people just jumped in. I got the lens back. They fixed it. It was apart. I don't know what was wrong with it. I'm waiting to hear back, and it's going to be about $268 or $69. So it was that much of a repair, and I do have it back now, but it's on this camera, so I can't hold it up and show you. Okay, take care, everyone. Thank you so much for watching, and we're going to close the video in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and goodbye.